they would be suspecting in the spinal fluid as the culture if they're going to use an acid-fast stain. Tuberculosis, Mycobacterium tuberculosis will have a whole take-home stuff on it in micro. That, yes.
Did you say zero things have a price
They called it on the slide. They didn't say, I think they said hemosiderin, and it looks black precipitate.
Okay.
When you see it, it's like the iron. That's what's precipitating out. Okay, so tell me what is the main stain in the acid fast? Anybody remember what we said yesterday? If crystal violet stains your gram-positives purple, what did I say was different about an acid fast? You used a stain that began with C, called carbolfuchsin. So if you're doing TB, you're going to learn in micro, those organisms have a very lipid cell wall, and it will maintain this pink stain. So you got to remember that with gram stains, you start with a purple stain and then decolorize. With acid fast, you start with a pink stain and decolorize. So they do opposite effects. The gram stain or gram negative ends pink. On an acid fast, everything else is dark blue with methylene blue. So that's, it never hurts you to hear something, even though you're going to do it more in micro, because it's in another time you hear it. What would be, if I was going to compare viral versus bacterial meningitis, tell me, you're the tech, what would you tell the physician based on results you got, what you thought was happening to that patient?
Glucose.
Glucose is what with bacterial?
Higher or decrease?
Decrease, right? So bacterial meningitis versus viral, decrease on the glucose, and this is what?
No.
And then, which one has a higher protein? I think they say it in the book, the protein. But basically, this says it's markedly higher, but they both can be normal to increased. So what is the big thing that helps you with bacterial versus viral is the glucose. Tell me what happens with cells. What do you see in bacterial when you do the diff? What's your key white cell in a bacterial infection? Even if you were doing blood. Your neutrophils, right? Because in blood, you might see the shift to the left, where you can get more immature forms too. Then what's your key white cell that you're going to report in a viral? Okay? And then what are the lining cells called if they're a lining cell in spinal fluid? Well, that's one name, and the other one begins with an E. Ependymal. And I don't care what you say on your test, you would just say one or the other. You don't just say lining cell, you need to know the names from where they come. Today we're going to learn you call them mesothelial cells when they're in serous fluids. So this little chart, what was the page you guys said? 95? We're only going to go till quarter till. So we're going to fill this out because this is all test 5, so for next week. But you're going to have to be able, given scenarios, tell me if the serous fluid is an exudate or a transudate based on results you get. Remember, as a tech, a lot of times that's all we get are the results. We don't know much else. So you got to be able to have what it should mean for the patient based on the results. So there's serous fluids. You have pleural is your big one. And another name for it is called thoracentesis. I probably see this name more when I got fluids than pleural fluid. Then you have peritoneal. This is probably in the order you'll get them too. This one I probably did more pleural fluids in my whole career than any body fluid. Next would be peritoneal, the serous. And then the third one, I don't know really if I actually ever did a cardio, the fluid around the sac, the fluid around the heart. This one is called ascites. So you need to know the other terms because you're going to see an ascites fluid and you got to know it's around the stomach. You're going to see a thoracentesis, you're going to know it's around the lungs. So serous fluids, you think of them in the abdominal cavity going around from the stomach, the intestines, to the lung, to the heart. And any buildup of a fluid, there's a term called an effusion. So sometimes you kind of got to know the terms. That is a buildup of any fluid around these organs. They call the term effusion. So what we're going to have to distinguish to help the doctor out is this buildup of fluid a systemic problem like a transudate, or is it a malignancy or an infection that's just localized, and they call those exudates. And most of the time, you had clear yellow fluids, so you know they're going to be a transudate, because one of the clues for an exudate is it's cloudy, which makes sense, right? We have cloudy urines for bacteria. You're going to have a cloudy fluid if it's a bacteria or cells. So you've got to know some of these terms. Okay? So these are the common fluids you're going to see, the CSF and your pleural especially. I would think in most normal hematology labs, you're going to see those on a regular basis every week. Like urgent care, I asked them, do you guys ever get fluids? No. So they must do all the fluids, have to go to the hospital. They do a ton of urines, but they didn't have any capability, they don't have to do the fluids. You are going to probably, most of you get to run fluids through the analyzers. My whole career at St. E's, we never ran them through an analyzer. Unless it was very bloody, like it was almost looked like blood, then we could. The rest of them, we always had to do ours manual. Now with the Sysmex, most of you are going to get to work with bigger, more advanced Sysmex than ours. You're probably going to be able to do all your fluids on your hematology analyzer. Or those of you who get to use the Iris as a UA analyzer, they can do body fluids too. You're going to get to see some of your counts done that way. So we want to know so the physician needs to know they have all this fluid. Sometimes when you get a thoracentesis fluid, it's like a gallon of milk. This yellow fluid comes back. That is excessive buildup around their lungs. So sometimes you're going to get this big vat of fluid that the doctor needs to know what's causing it. So you need to know what are the clues, and they're pretty easy, really. Sometimes the students get hung up on ratios of the fluid to the serum. But most of so you want to fill out the form as we go, because this is something you want to study then, because I can make a case study by using results from this table, and then you can tell me, is it a transudate or an exudate? So normally you're not going to have a lot of fluid built up around the area. And usually they use needle aspiration to draw up the fluid from that area. And then they deliver it to the lab, and then you have to aliquot it. And remember, an aliquot is just a portion of the sample. So, and sometimes there's going to be chemistry tests done on these fluids as well. So they're going to have to centrifuge theirs before they put it on an analyzer. We would just mix it.
So when you said the stomach for the peritoneal ascites, you didn't mean the actual organ of the stomach, you meant the abdomen?
The whole abdomen area. Usually transudates are systemic. It's not a localized problem. So if that helps you, an exudate, it's a localized problem at that organ. Like, for example, you hear of peritonitis if someone's appendix break or burst, that you might have fluid buildup because of an infection from your appendix bursting in your abdomen area, then you know that's going to be an exudate, and that fluid's going to be filled with bacteria. So they're probably, in that case, they won't bother culturing it, because if you have something well, I shouldn't say they wouldn't culture it. Appendix they could culture and come up with one organism. If you have any perforation or anything of the GI tract, it's pointless to cover it to culture it because you have so much disease state. So usually the common one, it's systemic, and the biggest one that ends up building fluid that you're going to learn about is congestive heart failure. Many times those persons' kidneys or lungs are not working properly. So this is systemic, and an example, they call it CHF, congestive heart failure. So that's an example, a very common example, especially people that might be on the heart floor, people who might be in intensive care. That's a very common culprit. Certain people that have their heart failing, sometimes even people with nephrotic syndrome or problems like a chronic glomerulonephritis or more of a severe kidney problem might have fluid buildup. But remember, the key thing is it's systemic. It's not one specific area in your trunk area that has a problem like a malignancy or infection. Exudates, you think bacterial infection probably number one, malignancy is another biggie with an exudate. So I would put examples, infection and probably primarily bacterial, and then malignancies. But the key thing is localized. Is right in one specific area. Like you might have a malignancy in the lung. It's localized to just the lung. It's not something widespread throughout the body. So think of this as localized, think of this as systemic. And remember, these are types of effusions. Effusions are the buildup of the fluid. These are types of them. So I put in the chart, it's probably from Strassenger. We're going to pick key ones. The first thing you're going to look at is the clarity. A lot of times they're pale yellow. They might look like pale yellow or straw. It's a tinge of yellow to the color. You know how spinal fluids, we say the common one is clear colorless? But with effusions, usually they're a yellowish tint when you get them in the lab. But it's more pale. It's not like a dark yellow. And these tend to be clear, a systemic, and these tend to be cloudy. So you already have a clue that you might be working with an exudate if it's cloudy, which makes sense. Either bacteria or you have extra cells like malignant cells or extra white cells. Next thing we're gonna use is specific gravity. I don't really know many labs that use specific gravity on their fluids, but to me, I don't know why not, because if it's less than 15, it's usually considered an exudate. If it's greater than 15, it's usually considered, a transudate. If it's greater, it's usually considered an exudate. Now, are all of you okay with your signs? I've had students get these mixed up on tests, the greater and less than, something you just assume, but I have had students get those signs mixed up. The cell counts, it would make sense if it's a systemic infection, there's not as many whites, okay? So this is specific gravity, this is clarity, and the white cells, usually it's less than 300, and usually it's greater than 1,000. So it makes sense. Probably you're gonna think more transudate if it's less than 1,000, but normally a systemic problem does not have hardly any cells, so it's pretty acellular. And I don't know, we're not going to use glucose. We typically did total protein and LD, and we're not going to do fibrinogen, and we're not going to do amylase. Typically, what labs use is the LD and protein ratio. So what they do, and this is where sometimes students get tripped up how to divide them. They take the fluid to serum ratio. So what would I do on a test? I either give you the ratio or I tell you what the fluid LD is or what the fluid total protein is, and then I give you the serum LD and the serum total protein. So all you'd have to do, let's just say if I take 120 LD over 300 LD, if this was the serum and this was the fluid, you just divide that to get the ratio. So sometimes I give it either way, where I make you come up with the ratio, or sometimes I'll say the ratio was 0.6. You just gotta know, and what I do, one is 0.6 and one is 0.5, I just make them both 0.5 for the sake of easy to remember. You do total protein and you do LD, fluid to serum ratio. So on the total protein, we're going to keep them as less than, I think it's less than 0.5. We're going to keep them both less than 0.5. And these were going to be greater than 0.5 and greater than 0.5. We're not going to have 0.6 for one and 0.5 for the other. We're going to have the same thing. So let's say anybody have something out that they could calculate? 120 divided by 300,
It's 2 to 5.
it'd be 0.25?
No, it's 2 to 5. 1 to 5.
No, take 120 divided by 300. Because 150 divided by 300 would be 0.5. So that has to be less, 0.4. So if the LD ratio was 0.4, what would you say it was, a transudate or an exudate? If it's less than 0.5, it's a transudate. So what if I had a total protein of 7.2, and I'm just guessing 8.6, what is that ratio? What's 7.2 divided by 8.6? I'm sorry, what?
It's at least 0.7.
0.7? So if I had a 0.7 total protein, then which one does it fit? Greater than 0.5 is an exudate. So you're when you get case studies, I can give it to you either way. I can tell you what the ratio is and just say, oh, the ratio was 1.1. Or the ratio was 0.3, and then you'll say, oh, that's an exudate or a transudate. But if I give you what is the fluid total protein and what is the serum total protein, you've got to calculate the ratio, okay? So this is the chart. So let's look at your chart a minute. Well, thought I brought a pen. Look at your chart a minute and let's fill it in and put test 5 on this. So what are we going to say for color? All of them are what? So either pale yellow, straw, or light yellow, either one of those terms. Volume we're going to put NA. We don't measure volume to report on any serous fluids, but synovial fluids we do measure volume. Specific gravity, what would you say? Less than? Okay, and then greater than. What are you going to say and remember, if you want to write here fluid to serum, and it's the ratio, if that helps. And then what are you going to put? Less than what on both of them for transudate?
0.5.
And then we'll say greater than, oops. And then white blood cells, what are we going to say for transudate? And then Okay, so did we miss anything that we have listed? So this is what you have to know for test 5, but it'll be applied to a case study, and then you'll have to tell me is it transudate or an exudate. Because, you know, sometimes that's all we have are the results. We don't have anything else to go by. Okay, so transudates. It is truly less than 0.6, but we'll just keep it as 0.5 on the LD. That way you only have to know one number. And then sometimes you'll, so straw, pale yellow, light yellow, that's typically what they are. And I think they're fun to count. A lot of times you might have to do the whole grid, so it takes you a little bit getting used to doing the whole grid. But a lot of times on a clear, colorless, or a straw clear, I would have two clickers. And I would do the whole grid once. And if I saw a white, I clicked here. If I saw a red, I clicked here. You'll get good when you're working and you got one person doing one scope, you're not sharing things. You can have 2 clickers out at the same time and you're doing the whole grid. That's pretty efficient then. You can count all the cells at the same time because it's not very cellular. You get a bloody fluid, count your red cells first, then you're going to have to go do the whole grid on the white cells. So that's going to be the rule of thumb today. You're going to have to do the whole grid on the whites. So you'll get experience trying it today. Bloody is the fluid that then you would almost do just like a diff. Run it through a machine like a regular blood sample and make a wedge smear if it's really bloody. Okay? And then sometimes if there's leakage of lymph fluid, they call it a chylous fluid. It'll look milky and cloudy. I never did a fluid that looked like that. But you're going to get to see lipemic blood when you go in chemistry, especially when they have problems with their lipids. Or sometimes you'll see it on some people just after a meal. They'll have a little bit tinge of whitish looking or milky looking serum or plasma. So that would be kind of like what the fluid would look like. And the whites, the cells are called mesothelial cells. So if you get a big fried egg, does it have a low or high NC ratio? It has the low NC ratio on the lining cells. Malignant cells, low or high NC ratio? High NC ratio. Who has the finer chromatin? The malignant cells, the mesothelial cells shouldn't be fine chromatin. So remember, who has the uniform, consistent appearance? The lining cells. Malignant cells sometimes are 3-dimensional. They look different. You might have a cluster of them and they all can look a little different. What else might you see in the malignant cells that someone recognized yesterday? The nucleolus. Okay? I love it when blasts have nucleolus. We're gonna do the diffs, and we'll start them on our next lab Thursday. We're gonna do the diffs how we did them at St. E's. You're gonna count 100 cells, and you're gonna count whites. You're just gonna say neutrophils, lymphocytes, monos, and if there might be an EO present. Then I'm gonna teach you how to call a lining cell and a macrophage. Our macrophage will be big and bubbly, lots of vacuoles. Our mesothelial cells are lining cells. I have never called one in a spinal fluid, but they're called choroid plexus or the ependymal. Those are usually flat, one-dimensional, but they're probably triple, the normal lining cell is probably triple of the size of like a monocyte, which is your biggest white cell. Remember, macrophages, big and bubbly, the lining cells, and they're much bigger than a normal blood cell. So just like you had to figure out size doing microscopics, you still got to keep in mind size when you're doing, so we'll start them on Thursday. And just remember, this is a big characteristic, the NC ratio and the chromatin. You always think of immature cells, soft, fine chromatin, and not a lot of cytoplasm. So that holds true whether you're doing a body fluid, whether you're doing blood, this similar characteristics. So this one, the one almost looks like your L3 Burkitt's lymphoma. Do you remember the weird vacuoles they have? I think that one's the easiest one of the L1, 2, and 3. L1s are the homogeneous little tiny ones, but L3, this almost looks like, it's not quite the weird looking colored vacuoles, but there are a ton of nucleoli in here. And the term basophilic, you should know that bluish, deep bluish color is deeper basophilia. Even if you get an atypical lymph, I was always picky about the atypical lymphs I called. I wanted them to be very basophilic, and I loved when they kind of indented to the red cells. So, you know, there's some just lymphs that are, what's the term I want to use, that reactive lymphs. Those don't mean they have mono. Atypical lymphs are different. So these, there's not total uniformity. These have a lot of varied shapes in a very soft chromatin, and look how big the nucleus is compared to the amount of cytoplasm. And even though this is an example what would be like a macrophage, see how small the lymph is? See how, and this is actually one that has a high NC ratio, but do you see how flat it looks? It doesn't look three-dimensional. It looks just like a sheet with a big round, and the nuclei are usually really nice and round on your lining cells. This is probably a better one. This would be a decent lining cell. This one has some tiny little vacuoles, and in the in-service it even says the mesos can become macrophages. But for me, if it's big and bubbly, you're going to call a macrophage. If it's a lining cell, if it's a serous fluid, you call a mesothelial cell. And you see how big, here's like a lymph and a neutrophil. You see how big they are? So remember, just like squamous is your biggest in your urine, you got to remember your macrophages for me are going to be the big bubbly ones, and the mesos are going to be the big fried egg ones. Now remember, typically they are much bigger than your normal blood cells, okay? And what does a monocyte become in the tissues? A macrophage. So are you hurting them if you call more monos or more macrophages? No. Mesothelial cells or lining cells, you're not hurting anybody. They're not bad cells. If you see a malignant cell, that's what you don't want to miss. So remember what I said, since the cytoplasm, the cytospin puts it in a little cell button, what are you going to do before you start counting, especially a very cellular one?
Scan it.
Scan it. On 10, I would scan it before you go to that 100, because you want to make sure you're doing the patient justice by, you get your cells counted in 2 fields, but you missed a big clump of malignant cells over here because you didn't scan it. Remember, some of them are so cellular, you're done in 2 fields. It's that fast. And this is an example of how the cytospin will look. They're all clumped together in the center. Okay, so what we're going to do, tomorrow we'll review that, and then I'm going to go ahead and print the in-service sheet. We're going to take our test first, but we're going to do synovial. And then I'm going to print the in-service sheets for you, because it's over spinal fluid, serous, and synovial, and it was a really good in-service over these 3 fluids that I had at St. E's. And then we'll also practice a little bit of case study type things, so that you can see how it applies to real settings. Okay, so what we're going to do in lab, we're going to try to start at 8:45. We're going to go, we'll have from 8:45 till 10:30, but we got a lot we're going to do. So Katie, it's your day to do the machine. Krista, it's your day Thursday to do the machine. And then, still left those books. I'm gonna get my body fluid book and my urine book, and I'm gonna put one at the end of the alphabet, one in the beginning, and you'll take them tonight, then the next day someone else will get to take them, till you can see both of my CAP books. I know you have the urine, do you have the body fluid one there too?
I can get it, yeah.
You have that, so you don't have to be part of the, okay. So we're gonna start swapping them, so you get to see the CAP books that I had bought as well. Okay, so the first thing you're gonna need out is your urine, I got you, and then we'll do the stool, and then we're gonna start the fluids. And I'll go get the rules to count when we'll get the pregnancy test and the stool done first. And then you guys can be getting the hematocytometer stuff while I go get the rules. So we're gonna get a lot done in 1 2.5 hour day.